Talking about Central America almost always brings up that set of images that everyone has seen. Beautiful beaches, volcanoes scattered across the map, and countries that have become known for reasons that are not always positive. Some people remember El Salvador, which recently made headlines around the world after changing its status from one of the most dangerous places on the planet to one of the safest, thanks to the Bukele administration. Others remember Cuba, either for its politics or for the historical saga of the embargo. But while all this talk dominates social media, two countries in the same region go almost unnoticed. Right in the middle of the continent, Costa Rica and Panama have achieved something rare. Without fanfare or scandal, they have become, in practice, the two richest countries in Central America. With stronger economies, higher quality of life, social indicators well above their neighbors, and that sense of stability that seems to be their exclusive natural resource. What did they do to reach this level? In today's Bello Mundo, you will understand why two countries that share borders with neighbors full of challenges have taken such different paths. Number 1. Location and general data. Central America is that narrow strip on the map that many people look at and think is all the same. A corridor squeezed between two oceans, with 7 countries sharing mountains, forests, and volcanoes that sprout from the ground like weeds. But if you look a little closer, you'll see that the contrast within is enormous. The region usually starts at the Isthmus of Tehuantepec in southern Mexico, the narrowest point between the Pacific and the Atlantic, about 124 miles wide. From there on, the accent changes, the terrain changes, and the most compact part of the continent begins with Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, Nicaragua, Costa Rica, Panama, and Belize, which is an exception, as it was a British colony until the 80s. It's like that brother who grew up far from the family. Same region, different upbringing. Overall, there are 7 small countries with populations that, combined, are nowhere near that of South Korea. And for a long time, they seemed to follow similar paths. Seemed. This is where the protagonists of today's video come in: Costa Rica and Panama. If you already follow the channel, you may have seen the special episode we did on Costa Rica, where we dive into the country's landscapes, culture, and most unlikely curiosities. But if you missed it, relax. We left the link in the description for you to watch later. Costa Rica is about the size of Denmark, with a double coastline both on the Pacific and the Caribbean, and a population of about 5 million people. The capital, San Jose, is right in the center of the territory and functions as the brain of a country that, without making much fuss, always seems to be a few steps ahead of its neighbors. Panama is right next door, bordering Costa Rica's southern border, with just over 4 million inhabitants and a location so strategic that it has become a key player in global trade. This is where the Panama Canal is located, the same one that Trump mentioned several times, saying he wanted to take back for the United States, and we'll talk about it in a moment. And even though all these countries share the same climate, vegetation, and part of their colonial heritage, when we look at their trajectories, the distance between Costa Rica and Panama and the rest of Central America is enormous, and it starts with their histories. Number 2. Historical comparisons. At first glance, the countries of Central America seem to have shared the same historical path. Small territories, similar Spanish colonization, and agricultural economies that grew slowly. But that's where the similarity ends. Starting in the 20th century, the region fragmented into completely different histories. Guatemala plunged into a civil war that lasted 36 years, a conflict that began in the 60s and only ended in 1996, leaving a trail of deaths, rights violations, and an entire country still trying to recover today. El Salvador followed a similar path. The country experienced a brutal civil war between 1979 and 1992. And even after the peace agreement, violence continued to grow until it transformed the country into the epicenter of the most feared gangs in the Americas. Only now, in the 21st century, is El Salvador attempting to rewrite its own history. Nicaragua entered an even more complicated cycle. First, there was the Somoza family dictatorship, then the Sandinista revolution, followed by another internal war, and then the return of authoritarianism. Today, the country remains under a closed regime led by Daniel Ortega in a political scenario that shows no signs of opening up. Honduras has also had no respite. A military coup in 2009, successive crises, fragile institutions, and violence rates that for a long time were among the highest in the world. It is a country that is trying to move forward, but every step is hampered by decades of accumulated instability. And this is exactly where the contrast begins to become clear. While all this was happening in the north of the region, Costa Rica and Panama followed a very different path. No long civil wars, no regimes collapsing every decade, no combination of violence and instability that swallows entire generations. Problems existed, of course, but nothing that destroyed the country from the inside out. This historical difference creates the first major gap. Decades lost to conflict and crisis prevent any economy from taking off. Decades with less turbulence, on the other hand, allow for the building of institutions, the planning of public policies, and the attraction of outside confidence. Today, Costa Rica and Panama are at the top of the table, and the rest of Central America is still trying to catch up. Number 3. Solid democracy and no army. The difference between the two countries and the rest of Central America begins with a very simple point to understand: democracy. Both countries made a decision that few of their neighbors had the courage to make. They nipped the problem in the bud. While many Central American countries were stuck in cycles of militarism, coups, and authoritarianism, the two decided to take a different path. Costa Rica abolished its army back in 1948. The country literally closed its barracks and transferred the armed forces budget to other areas. It was both a symbolic and practical act. Internal security was taken over by the civilian police, and the country never looked back. In Panama, the army was abolished after the arrest of Manuel Noriega in the late 80s. From then on, the country demilitarized completely, placed the forces under civilian control, and built a political system with less military interference. The result of this is easy to see. Without an army, there are no generals meddling in politics. Without a dictator in uniform, there are no coups announced on the radio. This way, the government can govern, and this kind of stability makes a difference. Governments that don't fall every 2 years provide security. Countries that don't live under constant threat become more attractive to investors. And all of this reinforces the idea that there is a more reliable environment there, both for those who live there and for those who come from abroad. While their neighbors had to deal with bloated military structures, Costa Rica and Panama began to use this space in a different way. The money that didn't go to tanks and barracks went to the population. Number 4. Education, health, and quality of life as a priority. If you don't spend money on war, you have money left over to invest in people. And that's exactly what they did. While their neighbors directed a large part of their budget to maintaining armed forces, these two countries put their resources into areas that change people's lives. Costa Rica has become a benchmark in Latin America for its investment in public education. The country allocates about 7% of its GDP to this sector, one of the highest rates in the region. And this effort is reflected in the data. The literacy rate is close to 100%. Basic education covers virtually the entire territory, and the country also has programs focused on science, technology, and languages that are not common in neighboring countries. In health, the logic is similar. Costa Rica has created a public system that works, with national coverage, free care, and indicators worthy of a rich country. Life expectancy is one of the highest in the Americas. Infant mortality is one of the lowest. And access to health care does not depend on social class. Panama follows the same line, but with a more mixed model. The country invests in health and education programs with an urban focus, mainly in the capital, where a large part of the population lives. The system is not perfect, but it works better than in much of the region. For both countries, this investment in people has paid off. A more educated, healthier population with better prospects becomes an engine of growth. In other words, while some were struggling to maintain order in the streets and seize power, Costa Rica and Panama were already building classrooms and health centers. It is no surprise that both countries lead the rankings for human development, quality of life, and access to basic services in Central America. Number 5. Diversified and liberal economy. After ensuring political stability and investing in people, Costa Rica and Panama managed to build open economies with more than one engine running at the same time. Costa Rica left behind the old model of exporting bananas and coffee. The country has become a high-tech hub, attracting laboratories, electronics factories, service centers, and even strengthening ecological tourism and the outsourcing sector. Today, much of the economy revolves around specialized services and light manufacturing. In 2024, Costa Rica's GDP stood at around $95 billion. It is the third largest in Central America, behind Guatemala and Panama. But here, an explanation is in order. Guatemala even leads in volume with $113 billion, but it has more than 18 million inhabitants, and more than half of the country's recent growth comes from outside. Remittances sent by immigrants account for almost 20% of Guatemala's GDP. In other words, the money comes in, but it is not generated there. Costa Rica, on the other hand, has an economy that stands on its own 2 feet, and that is where the most important data of all comes in. The country's GDP per capita is around $17,800. It is higher than that of Chile, which loves to sell itself as a model of progress in Latin America. Panama is not far behind. With just over 4 million inhabitants, a dollarized system, and a service-driven economy, the country closed 2024 with a GDP of $86 billion. But what is impressive is the GDP per capita, almost $19,400, the highest in Central America. Much of this comes from the canal. Since 1999, in the hands of the Panamanians, it has become a money-making machine. In 2025 alone, it generated $5.7 billion in revenue. This represents almost 8% of GDP and more than 20% of government revenue. In addition, the country has created free trade zones, become a banking paradise, set up a first-class logistics hub, and connected its economy to the world without relying on any commodities. All of this operates in dollars, which provides a stability that its neighbors can only watch from afar. Number 6. Tourism and the environment as drivers. In addition to a diversified economy based on technology, services, trade, and logistics, Costa Rica and Panama also made a strategic choice that helped push GDP upward. They knew how to sell what they already had in abundance: a tropical climate, movie-like landscapes, and a good dose of stability to transform all of this into a tourist experience. Costa Rica has become a global benchmark in ecotourism. Tropical forests, active volcanoes, unspoiled beaches, incredible biodiversity, and sharp marketing around the famous Pura Vida, pure life slogan. Tourism there accounts for more than 6% of GDP directly, and that number rises to about 8% if we consider the indirect effects. What's more, the sector was once responsible for more than 9% of formal jobs in the country. Panama, on the other hand, has taken a different approach. It has combined urban tourism with Caribbean beaches and has also made the canal a major tourist attraction. Cities such as the capital, Panama City, with its skyscrapers and casinos, Bocas del Toro, a paradisiacal archipelago known for its crystal-clear waters, and San Blas, a group of islands controlled by the Guna indigenous people, have become a must-see for those seeking an exotic experience without giving up infrastructure. Today, the tourism sector already accounts for almost 17% of Panama's economy, placing the country among those that profit most from visitors in Latin America. Each visitor who arrives generates business for transportation, hotels, restaurants, guides, and local commerce. Each tourist dollar turns into another, and then another. That's why both countries take this seriously. They invest heavily in parks, events, international promotion, and easy visas. While neighboring countries still treat tourism as a bonus, these two have turned it into an economic pillar. And all of this has a welcome side effect, because not every foreigner who arrives is just passing through. Many people come to stay, and with deep pockets. Number 7. Millionaires and investors. With stable economies, strong currencies, high quality of life, and a functioning government, Costa Rica and Panama have created an environment that attracts the attention of those with money. And there are quite a few of them. The two countries have become destinations for millionaires, executives, foreign retirees, and investors who are fleeing instability in other parts of Latin America. According to Bloomberg Linea, one of Latin America's leading economics and finance portals, Costa Rica alone is expected to attract 350 new millionaires by the end of 2025. Panama is close behind, with more than 300 high-net-worth individuals expected to arrive there in the coming months. And it's not just rich people who are coming. Companies are too. Costa Rica has become the headquarters for multinational technology, logistics, and service operations. Intel, Microsoft, Amazon, among others, have already established a presence in the country. In Panama, the movement is similar, but with a focus on finance, transportation, and telecommunications. The country has become a logistics hub for several global giants operating in Latin America. And why these two places and not others? Because they offer exactly what their neighbors lack: stable governments, clear rules, good infrastructure, connectivity, and an environment where money circulates without fear. Both have low capital taxes, no inheritance tax, and a series of incentives to attract new residents. Meanwhile, in places like Honduras or Nicaragua, bureaucracy swallows up entrepreneurs, political risk scares off investors, and the lack of basic infrastructure turns any plan into a logistical nightmare. That is why today, in practice, Costa Rica and Panama no longer compete with their neighbors. They are playing a different game. Of course, there are still challenges. Both face internal inequalities, need to deal with urban pressure, growing demand for public services, and the effects of climate change on tourism. But the progress is undeniable. They have adopted a formula that is almost the opposite of that of their troubled neighbors. And the result is simple. More stability brings more money. More money drives the economy. And a strong economy puts them light years ahead of the rest of the region. And that's it for today. But what about you? Did you already know these interesting facts? Have you visited these countries? Tell us in the comments. And before you leave, subscribe to the channel and turn on the bell so you don't miss any episodes of our Bello Mundo. And try using the new Hyper video feature. It really helps the channel reach more people and continue bringing you different content. Like this. See you next time.